Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to this for probably close to 2 years, and just the ability to dive into kind of the world of operations. We met on Vivek's campaign a number of years ago and kind of went through the chaos of, going at warp speed for close to 10 months.
I will say that Vivek is that campaign, as many as I've been on, that one was unique in its in its complexities and the speed at which we had to do things.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing. Something I kind of wanted to talk about, just kind of right out the gate, not having to dive into the chaos of the campaign too terribly much, but what is one of the things that you've learned over the years, having done a lot of work in the operations space, in building out infrastructure to be able to do things? When someone calls and says, hey, we need to put up an event, or we need to have this merch in Iowa tomorrow, I think that was one of the most impressive things from my perspective, seeing a design on the computer and then less than 48 hours seeing 17 boxes and 10,000 hats showing up across the country.
Well, I always start with it's people, people, people. The relationships that you build along the way have always been what I pride myself on. And as you've probably learned in this space, it is a small, small world.
Yeah.
Your reputation, who you know, who you work with, that opens the doors for your next opportunities, and having a lot of people on backup that you can call if you need something, have a big ask.
Yeah.
And then I'd say everything I do was always in the lens of scalability. So there wasn't a lot that I would make that, whether it was an image, I always worked with partners that had the ability to scale it up as needed. As in any campaign, you could go from, starting with Vivek, we were at 1% name ID when I started, month one. That scalability, I mean, for him to be a name that people knew, a household name, for him to be on the Republican stage, that was a very, very quick ramp up. But it also, it was a 6-month time period, but I'd say really the ramp up happened in 1 month. He went from a 1% to a 15% in such a short gap. And that's when it's not just the merchandise, but it's the crowd sizes, it's the staffing that you have built around it. It's, the ability just to really scale it, or it becomes irrelevant. You don't get ROI from it.
Yeah, that's kind of insane. One of the, kind of double clicking into it a little bit, when it comes to building something that quickly, there are a lot of things that obviously need to go into it. And when you have, the size of a traditional national campaign, there's a lot of connections that build out through that. I guess starting out, how many years have you been kind of working in that space to be able to get to a place where in the span of 6 months, you can go from 0 to 1% name ID to household name, and scaling that up that quickly? Because I think for most people listening at home, if you've never built a business, if you've never built a, professional network, that doesn't happen overnight.
Correct. And it's interesting. So my first campaign actually started in Ohio, sitting in Columbus, Ohio right now. It's amazing. That's where I kind of got my sea legs. And it's funny that even a decade later, I was still calling people that I hadn't talked to in over a decade, as sources to help me fill out some of our gaps. But no, it's been over a decade, and it's been across many different types of campaigns. So I had Vivek's presidential, and I did one other presidential in 2016, which was a similar experience in starting with a very, very small team and scaling up, run in a very, very different way. But that helped prepare me for exactly what it looked like. Doing a presidential campaign is a unique, it's a unique process, and it's something that it's institutional knowledge you only get when you do it. So having that 2016 experience was so great for 2024 on the presidential, but across the board, from congressional to Senate races to gubernatorial, they all have a unique angle, and they're run all very differently.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very cool experience, and you get to use skills from so many different concepts to make it work. And that was the cool thing about the Audeince campaign.
Yeah. What are some of the things that are different from, doing a presidential to a gubernatorial to a Senate? Like obviously I would imagine scale is a big part of that. You're
Scale
not
is huge.
going.
Budget is huge. Outside resources, primary versus general, also are huge differences. So in a primary campaign, you are running, in my case, you might be running to the right of an aisle, more so to really stand out amongst your competitors. When you hit a general election, you're the unifier. So you're coming together, and that changes your messaging, how you schedule things out, how you build your campaign flow and your talking points. And then, a senator is a position where you are running. It's a position. It's a federal position that you're representing everything from foreign policy to budget to environmental issues. So you have to be kind of all encompassing and be able to speak at least semi-coherently on all of these topics.
Yeah.
But a senator is also kind of like a clog, and they pass so much legislation. They don't really lead a lot of legislation, and usually the ones that do end up having trouble with campaigns because there's always, if you're compromising by working across the aisle, which you think is a good concept in Senate, all of a sudden in a primary, that's a really bad thing because you worked with the opposite party and you compromise values. So
That's kind of crazy. And I feel like timing on this is kind of a little bit too on the nose perfect because we just watched as RFK and Tulsi and all the people are going through their confirmation hearings right now. And as someone who's never really gotten to like sit and listen to those, I've heard commentary that it's like, what are these senators doing? They're very uninformed. And it was like, but to see it with my own lying eyes was absolutely something totally different.
Yeah.
As I'm, watching someone say something and then people are able to pull up the receipts in real time and go, actually, no, that's not true.
It's a different culture. It's live information.
It is. But I also there's a part of me that doesn't fully blame them on that because imagining that, I've spent a lot of time getting to research a lot of these subjects they're trying to talk on, and they have to do that exact same job every single day, but for 1,000 subjects.
Correct.
And they're relying on an army of people to provide them with the right information, and they get those talking points, and they're the presenter to go out there. And if you're not given the right talking points, you can sound like a fool.
Absolutely. And I will say even more so, I think the toughest position is when you're a member of Congress. That is a 2-year term. And I worked on the official side a decade ago, and as this was like a scheduling position. And I remember even then, from the time my congressman had gotten elected, maybe within 2 months, we were already actively scheduling out fundraisers, scheduling out his political side. You really don't have time to not be campaigning in that time period. So every public statement, every congressional hearing, it's potential to give you campaign materials that you can use and then campaign on. The system is built to make it very, very difficult to actually legislate.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That honestly feels very counterproductive. But
it does. And that's why I find senators, at least when it's a 6-year term, you really get to dive in on the issues a little bit more. You're campaigning, but you're not campaigning at that level.
Yeah. That feels like it's a way more productive thing to be doing.
It is. There's less of them too. So
that's crazy. So I think also kind of hitting a little bit more on kind of specifics in terms of when it comes to operations, that's something I kind of got firsthand experience on this year. And I think I texted you shortly after starting my previous job and realizing the insanity of how crazy it is to keep something like a campaign on the rails.
Keep the train. Yep. Keep the train moving.
With, when you factor in, 24/7 news cycles and the constant need to change things in a base for someone that's thinking about jumping into this, what are some basic tools that help you mentally prepare for it and be ready to go?
I'd say number one, the way I look at any problem across the board is you need to get to a yes. And that is the attitude I always have. And there are some campaigns that kind of push that yes to a further limit. But it also on the back end has helped my colleagues when I say something is not possible to do, or I flag that we have to have a deadline by this to get it done. They take those seriously, and I think that's because the idea of I'm always trying to make it work, and that flexibility, and you're going to love your idea, but your idea is not always the idea that is the best. It's not. It's not the best for the vision, and everyone has competing interests. At the end of the day, like on an operations side, we want to get good crowds. We want to build out good events. We want to have backdrops, et cetera. But the media team is after trying to get a interview clip, a game day shot, or something that they can build a piece off of. The political team is trying to get signups for candidates, for the actual attendees to sign volunteers up. And then you have your coalition groups that are all there to try to build more coalitions. So when you have a whole staff of 50 people at an event, I understand that we all have different goals here. And I want to keep the train moving, but you have to prioritize. Like a lot of times, media is the most important. And Vivek was a great example of being prepared and being able to make things work on the media side. Gave him countless opportunities to reach a further audience. So it was, a national campaign run.
Yeah, I mean, and now I would say, granted, as someone working on the operational side of that media, being able to make sure that even if we were walking into a room with 10 to 15 people, that was going out to hopefully hundreds of thousands of other people, and that, discrepancy was kind of crazy. That's kind of an interesting perspective that I literally did not even think about the entire campaign until this moment we're sitting here.
Yeah.
That's got to be an insane challenge to manage the balance of every single event. You got 15 to 20 people with 15 to 20 different goals trying to hit. Is there a way that you're able to quantify a measure of success, not necessarily having to be a, binary, like, oh, we did XYZ, but the political team won this time because they got 200 signups, or the media team won because we did a news hit that raised us $15,000 or whatever it was.
It's funny. There's a campaign mentor that I have who blocks out a candidate's schedule to the hour of exactly what they should be doing. So if it is 40 hours of finance a week, that is built into your schedule. Everything from like personal time to sleeping to doing your political calls, it's all built in. And like every different campaign has a different strategy on like where to invest these resources in. You do have to touch them across the board. But that being said, every campaign has a different amount of surrogates, people that can represent you, that may be able to help take off certain loads. Number one objective, I hate to say this, but it's appeasing the candidate. That always is the first measure of success. If your candidate is happy with how things ran, even if you didn't get one sign up, it's a lot better if you have a happy candidate than an unhappy candidate with 20 new volunteers. And that's unfortunate with how this industry works. And then I'd say like I'm always media at heart. Media has always been, to me, it's the most effective way to get your message out if done correctly. So making sure to prioritize media, that the way it worked in my ranking scales were national media is kind of the cream. And that is like, if we can get something like that needs to take priority over like a political call. Political was great because you can always work around political. Like you can always add in events, you can always add in one-off calls, you can always do coalitions or virtual meetings and things. There's a lot more flexibility. Unfortunately, finance really takes that number 2 slot. Now I've worked for some self-funders that have kind of changed a little bit of the finance priorities. But generally speaking, for a Senate race, finance is usually you can't do anything if you're not funding it. So they always get like the priority.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I have only ever had the experience of working on 2 self-funded campaigns. And so
Very different.
I have enough conversations with people in this industry and they're like, ah, yeah, that's right. You're working for
Yeah,
self-funders.
it
And
really does allow you it allows you to focus on media.
if, like me, you hate ad breaks and podcasts, well, we're going to keep this one straight and to the point. If you need any production help, feel free to hit me up at brandongoodyear.com. Let's get back into the episode. Yeah.
And storytelling, and that's why we're seeing so many podcasts being created as like a new outlet.
Yeah.
But no, like if you don't have that money to fund it, you don't have a staff, you don't have anything, and that scalability is it's null and void again without funds.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I think about this just, kind of watching how elections are run. And, I have my own experiences, in both the kind of, DIY it till you make it type thing,
Yeah.
even though we had a pretty solid budget to work with. But one of the things I'm like really interested on is like at a certain point, and you mentioned this right before we started recording, but like there are candidates that end up with a staff that creates too much red tape. And I think like, it's ironic because as you were saying earlier, the way the government kind of works, like you ultimately don't get to do the job you need to do.
Yeah.
Because you're focused on that next election cycle to make sure you can get in to move the ball, 1 inch up the field.
Yeah.
But if you're on a campaign, that's like, if you ever want to see what it looks like to run government without that red tape, take a look at the inside of a campaign, because that is everyone that puts up red tape is immediately going to get cut down by 6 other people.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have time for that.
Absolutely. We always joke that there's no such thing as HR on campaigns. It doesn't exist. And yeah, the concept of, I like to compare for folks that are not involved in politics. I'd compare a campaign to a startup. It has the same mentality. It's like that ragtag, all hands on deck approach. And generally speaking, like you do one campaign with somebody, you can immediately tell how they are in terms of like their attitude, their amendability, how much they can, how flexible they are, where they draw the line. And like that really determines future employment. You never want to bring somebody in who was difficult or who was a no person. And that's across the board on the legal side, also finding a lawyer who's willing to work with you and push those limits to do truly creative things. It's a great opportunity, but that red tape, there's a reason that so many people go back to campaigns instead of going into like the offices of who they helped elect. It's day and night difference. And just in the startup world, like it's that versus working in corporate America.
Yeah.
That's how you got to compare it.
It's also, I had a moment shortly after leaving the campaign in 2023, kind of the idea of building a business around, hitting this 4-year cycle. And I like had this moment of like, oh, I'm reinventing the wheel on this. I'm going to bring in my production people. We're going to do this. And then I realized that's literally how everyone in that world operates.
Yeah, it's usually a 2-year cycle for the most part. But mostly you'll operate on that 2-year for the congressional races, and it's obviously Senate positions and gubernatorial will still fluctuate as in a 2-year cycle. This is why having multiple clients is helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you were talking about like that ramp up presidential, you can prepare ahead of time, but preparing more than a year out oftentimes becomes a waste of time because the environment has changed so much in that time.
100%. Yeah, even just from like a technology standpoint, I think about, some of the stuff that we did back in 2023. Literally, I have things today that have solved 90% of the problems we had back then. And it blows my mind because I think about it regularly where I'm like, oh, this is a $200 solution to something we were literally banging our head against the wall for 9 months straight.
I know I think about it a lot with, I've worked with media doing like the Republican National Convention back in 2016 time period where I handled media operations side.
Yeah.
And then jumped over to the White House where I was continuing to do essentially media operations. In that time period of 2016 to 2020, we went the idea of like a live view became
Yeah.
a thing. So all of a sudden, I'd be traveling the world with members of the press, looking at fiber optics and
Yeah.
traveling with a physical AT&T representative with us
Yeah.
to go in and check connectivity and spend. I mean, the press would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to build this infrastructure to be able to go live for events.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like nowadays, I think to how they have to handle it like at the current state, what a difference.
Oh, it's insane. I mean, I literally have been looking at wanting to get like one of the little Starlink minis.
Oh yeah,
We use that on the campaign, but I think everyone asked, they're like, "Oh, didn't you have a Starlink?" And I was like, "You want to know how many times I used it? 3 times."
yeah,
One of them was literally just to get us on the internet in the middle of New Hampshire, and actually one time I used it for a news hit, and it was the most insane thing ever because it went from they're like, "We can't do this because we can't see your picture," to "This is great." But the funny thing is, I always also told people, like, during that time, like, if you thought I had time to set up a Starlink, just be aware I almost didn't make it in the SUV to get to my next
yeah.
destination 90% of the time.
But still, a Starlink over a fiber is
Oh.
it's day and night in terms of ease and on a campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and I just think that was this past cycle. Where will be this next cycle in terms of ease? I mean, news is on the go and it's on the fly, and like
Yeah.
the speed in which you get it is how it generates, and so I believe that technology will continue to move in the direction of making it easier and easier to be able to connect.
Yeah. What do you see as one of the new exciting things that you're excited for coming up in this next cycle? We still have another 4 years, so we'll hopefully have a few years to not think about it. But like, hopefully, in 4 years, what do you think will be the like quintessential thing? I've heard a lot of commentary, people talk about this election cycle being the podcast election
Yeah.
cycle. And I'm excited that was like the one that I jumped in on because
Yeah.
I've literally, as far back as 2010 been like, podcasts are the move.
Yeah.
And the fact that, we finally caught up to that is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I've loved watching the podcast media dynamic be so incorporated into the presidential campaigns. Truthfully, it's the first campaign, even the campaigns that I worked with last cycle, like they still were not using podcasts. And there is something unique about a podcast only works if you have an interesting personality doing it.
100%.
And unfortunately, that's not always going to be the case across the board for candidates.
Yeah.
There are some folks that are they are going to have to win based on what they do in their elected position, and if that's like what they have as their strength, that's great. It's very helpful. I don't think there is a one hat fits all. I do find excitement, especially after this past election, just seeing a shift with like the youth and where they're going, and how much more open they are to learning new things. We're not using the traditional TV broadcast commercials as your number one form of communication, even though that continues to be where most of the campaign money is going.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see that part phase out.
Yeah.
As we have a younger demographic starting to vote.
Yeah, I think that's pretty incredible, and that's something that I loved kind of getting to see this election cycle is like, realizing, and granted, getting to like spend a lot of time on the trail on the go, you get to see a lot of the people that are coming out, and it was refreshing to me to see a lot of the kids and like middle-aged people that were attending a lot of these events. It also unique opportunity getting to be in a presidential primary.
Yeah.
Getting to see the difference in the way people view politics in specifically Iowa and New Hampshire versus everywhere else.
And that's the the cool thing. It's like all campaigns, all politics is local. My first campaign was actually an Ohio State student government campaign.
Oh, that's
and I
amazing.
always say that's one of like that is one of the most hard fought types of campaigns because it's at such a micro level. It's so personal. You know the voters, you know the demographic, and
it's like everyone knows everyone in that.
Exactly. And it really is like old fashioned campaigning. So going from that, there's no self-funders. There's no, it's just it's a great concept of how like a campaign could be run,
Yeah.
if everything was a fair, equitable world.
Yeah.
But
I
no, go ahead.
I think about that a lot in terms of like, the community aspect that you have to build on this. And granted, it's in my benefit for people to be doing more media and video and podcasts and live streams and all those. But like the reality is, for me, the thing that got me the most excited was the amount of in-person aspect to this whole campaign world is. There are very rare people that can just post on the internet, go mega viral, and actually like sway an entire population because of that.
Yeah,
And everyone else, you got to go to the diner, you got to shake people's hands, you got to talk to people. And that aspect of the whole thing for me was like really refreshing and exciting. And like, if you're a billionaire out there and want to run for office, you should, just to go get to meet, a large swath of the country.
no, it's when you hear about businessmen running for president, I think, and you'll hear them say this after the fact. I've heard from so many different candidates, and as I said, I had a lot of self-funders who started off as businessmen before entering the political arena. You are talking to people that you've never had a chance to talk to, and you are learning issues that you've never had an opportunity to learn about. And you're conversing, and your perspective is going to change. Or if you're the right candidate, your perspective is open and receptive to it. But you are not winning. You're not winning a presidential if you cannot relate to New Hampshire's "Live Free or Die" or like the Iowans, like tight knit church, family, faith demographic.
Yeah.
You need to have one of those. And there's a reason, like, people in those states are spoiled that they get to see every single candidate. The idea of not seeing that candidate is crazy. That's like the luxury of living in an early state.
I think I heard someone in Iowa that they literally were like, yeah, I can't trust someone unless I've shaken their hand 6 times.
Can you imagine that? Like in any other, a flyover state having that type of like.
I was born and raised in Southern California. I don't remember ever hearing a single thing about a candidate coming to town, other than like one guy at my church on Sunday complaining about being late for church because Obama was coming down or something. Like outside of that, like I didn't even know that was a thing.
And on my end, like I started politics like 2012 was my first cycle, and I was in Ohio where it was, so goes Ohio, so goes the nation. And I had the opportunity to see all the candidates. And I've lived in Pennsylvania, I've lived in Florida, like also some big swing states or swing states at that time. It is so exciting to learn about each person's interest. It really does open your eyes to like America. Like you actually get to see this country, and it's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the one thing coming out of this, now I tell any one of my production friends, I'm like, just from a like skills standpoint, if you have the opportunity to do this, do it, because you're going to learn more in 9 months than you'll learn anywhere else, period.
Absolutely. I recommend doing it younger.
Yes.
When you're unmarried is better. But no, it's, if you're in your 20s specifically, and you have an opportunity to get onto a campaign, I don't believe any place you would learn as much information and such a wide variety of information than you'd learn at a campaign. You're pretty multifaceted, and you understand like you're trying to get your person elected, but who you're talking to try to get them elected varies from person to person, and you have to be able to communicate to all of them.
100%. Yeah, and that's like the one thing that I'm like kind of starting to realize across the board is like, I think the majority of people, when they hear about the world of politics, they only hear the most polarizing on either side, and they only ever see the degenerate commentary online.
Yeah.
But what they don't see is all of the in-person conversations. And I think that was one of the things that really opened my eyes, especially on Vivek's campaign, was realizing the gravity of, it's my job and responsibility to communicate everything that we're doing, but you only have 30 seconds of someone's attention.
Yeah.
And so every single, this is the policy and this is the 30-second soundbite. And then someone takes that 30-second soundbite and does a 4-hour disassembling of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I want to give you the 4-hour counterpart to that, but also like understanding that we have to communicate effectively, because at the end of the day, you only have, if you're early, you have 24 months to get that message out.
Yeah.
And if you're late, you got 12 months, maybe.
And it's funny, like Vivek at the beginning, when we started off just building his block schedule and how he would spend his time,
Yeah.
and I'm coming from the place of like using your blocked allocated times, very, very methodical of, like you need your 40 finance hours, find your 40 finance hours.
Yeah.
You need 10 hours of media, find your 10 hours of media on that schedule. But in the Vivek world, where finance didn't consume as much of your time, and you had the ability really to build out that media, but also political was like an important component, like
Yeah.
actually meeting with elected officials and the voters themselves, and that whole dynamic. It was me building out a schedule. I have him for 2 hours today. It's the only time I have him today. What am I going to spend those 2 hours doing? What is the most effective use of his 2 hour time? Is it
100%.
calling that donor for $100,000? Is it calling is it doing a Fox and Friends hit? Is it doing a podcast, or is it, sitting down and calling all of the, state senators in a specific state?
Yeah.
It really is. And that is where having like a good team and knowing when to flag important things. Everyone's, as I said, they all have their own self-interest, and campaigns really, they're not as cliquey as I'd say like a corporate America is.
Yeah.
In like, you're going to have your finance world, you're going to have your comms world, your political world. But generally speaking, like media and political are if done correctly, they should always be in lockstep.
Yeah.
Because it is emphasizing whatever they're doing on the road on the political side.
Yeah.
You are like, the media is the amplification of it.
Yeah.
Finance, generally speaking, on a normal campaign ends up always taking priority, because political and media know that they can't hire their staffers, they can't hire their editors, they can't hire their field guys without that finance taking priority. So
100%.
that's also really well understood.
Yeah, as I like reflect back on like the past couple years and kind of like seeing how it all goes, it's like, it's always kind of a miracle to see the, people from all walks of life coming together and somehow making this thing work. But I think like, I kind of want to get into this side of it a little bit, is like, this entire world that does campaigns is such a small, close-knit community. I like, the best way to describe it is like, a JV soccer team. One cycle you're going to be on team with this set of friends, and the next cycle you're going to be with another set of friends. And it's like, for me, the thing that kind of like was refreshing about the whole thing is like, a lot of people will have this malicious intent of who's working on whose campaign. But the reality is, at the end of the day, like, it's all just a bunch of really talented people doing their job. And like, whoever you end up working for, great. If you get a win under your belt, you got a 1-0 this season, or, and that's kind of the way everyone approaches it. Like,
it really
it's
is
fun.
It is. It's the best part of it. And I'll say, like, one of the most fun or enjoyable parts of like the campaign would be going and doing like the debate walkthroughs, because it would be an opportunity to sit and go with the other campaign representatives who were always your friends. And if you're in the operations world, you're in the operations world.
Yeah.
I'll say for at least this 2024 cycle, there is not one person on an operations staff across all the campaigns that I had not worked with and had some type of friendship with. And it makes you better. It makes, like, a lot of it is, I'd understand exactly how, okay, they have this person who's in charge, this person's gonna really build out the backdrops and the staging. One of the cool things is, you have your operations, but you also, within that world, you have your advanced world, which is like an even smaller bucket of people. And they kind of build the frame of how your events look and the feel of it. So no, being able to, and these guys, we work together. Like, these guys will contract you one time and they'll go in contract with another. And there isn't a fear of sabotage. There isn't a fear. It really is like, it's their reputation. So they're not going to ever risk putting themselves on the line. yeah, it's a lot more connected than anybody expects, and I think it's the best part about the campaigns.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with Ben and Katie on the road, and they're arguably two of my favorite people from the entire campaign. And I like it was just so much fun getting to like see how that whole world works. And it also like they became good friends because I realized that 90% of the job I was doing wasn't possible if they weren't able to build out and do the things they needed to do.
It's a hard
And
concept, like to
it's
understand what advance is because they're not supposed to be seen.
yeah, that was some of the funnest conversations that I ever had. Is like the idea of if you don't see me, I have done my job right, and if you
Correct.
see me running around, well, you might not want to walk into that event
Exactly.
because you
And
never know what's going to happen.
no, and speaking of Ben, that was one of his like rules of operation was if you see me panicked on game day, then I have not done my job correctly.
Yeah,
And it really is, yeah. An incredible advanced staffer goes through every possible issue during their advanced time period. That by the time it's game day, they have anticipated every possible problem. That there is no nerves. It's a calm, collected one. But it's funny. Even like a Ben and Katie. Like I remember, I worked with them before they were a Ben and Katie.
yeah,
Like they yeah, I think it was White House time period is when they got together. But I'll see photos of. I just saw a photo of me and Ben in Helsinki
oh my
doing a
goodness,
Putin summit, and like
yeah,
I mean, we're talking like these are like 8 years ago, like
yeah,
totally different context, but it doesn't matter. Like
yeah,
and half of those advanced staff are the advanced or operations people on the other campaigns.
yep.
And our guy, John Hiller, who was one of our great advanced guys, is running White House Advance currently. It's
That's
it's a
amazing.
really small world.
Yeah, it blows my mind because now it's like for me, kind of like not really knowing what I was getting into, connecting into this world, and then being able to have conversations. And even, I remember having conversations with Ben about this on the campaign trail, and he was like, yeah, he's like, remember this meeting with this world leader? Like, I was the one who set this whole thing
Hmm.
up. We really connected on something because unbeknownst to him and unbeknownst to pretty much anyone on the campaign, uh, election time 2020, I did like a whole Instagram story series because at the time, as you know, with me, I'm obsessed with all things audio.
Of course.
And so I was, prior to diving into the political world, was interested just simply in the fact that Trump in 2016 was the first person to make any change to the presidential podium with the large gooseneck
Yep.
as a result of the debate where he wasn't able to really be heard.
Yeah.
And so in 2020, I did this whole thing and I was like, listen, I don't care what your politics are. You knew what he was saying, you could hear. I tuned into the election in 2020, and the only thing that I noticed was I was like, I had my volume cranked as loud as it could go. I'm like, I can't hear a word this guy's saying. And I was like, oh, and it clicked. It's like they're using the same stuff they've been using all the way since I think it was like the 70s. And the fact that when you understand how to communicate and you do all the things right, whatever your message is, agree or disagree, if you know exactly what someone's saying, that's better than not knowing what they're saying. Like,
Absolutely. And that is the one thing with Trump that I think he understood more than any other president we've had in modern history. I mean, I remember he brought in media folks to kind of run his comm shop, and there's a reason. There's this narrative of like a contentious relationship between him
yep,
and the press, and coming from the inside part of this, Trump understood very well that he couldn't do what he needed to do without the media being there, and by default, that was people like us and our team making sure that we had the media in those countries with those
yep,
credentials able to broadcast it. It really is it's a partnership to get
yeah,
those messages out, and I believe it's always best for America to have that open free press that is accessible, that you can actually get direct questions from. So that is one thing I learned specifically from that Trump administration, just how important it is.
yeah. I think like being able to have those like transparent, open conversations is something insanely valuable. And, I get like the way I always kind of see it is like, regardless of whether or not you agree with them, being able to actually have those open conversations is better than any form of rejection.
Oh,
And I think like
absolutely.
that's something like I always see it, from whether that's like the corporate world or you see like, I think anytime you see transparency start to come to things, that's when like all the shit starts to come out. And I, have seen it from
We're seeing it on
church, like
congressional hearings right
see
now.
it
This is
in
why you're watching
congressional
them.
hearings. Exactly. I mean, that's like why it's like interesting because all of a sudden you start, peeling back the carpet and realize like, oh wait, we got like 100 years of dust under here that's causing all sorts of issues to the structural integrity of our entire institution.
Yeah. And it's
And
really hard to make changes very quickly, especially when you have such an institutionalized system in place. So no, the idea of shaking it up. And I will say also, working with the media, building that rapport and that trust is also such a huge part of that. Making sure that you can say something off the record and it stays off the record for planning purposes.
yeah,
That partnership that you have with media, that you can tell them, where they need to be. If we're doing like a 5 or 6 stop trip, to 5 or 6 different countries, media at the end of the day, they have to be on Eastern time.
yeah,
So it doesn't matter if we're in Asia, like they need to stay on Eastern time. And it's great if Trump is doing a summit, an APEC summit, but the viewers in America, they're not going to be up at that time to watch it. Like what they
exactly.
need is the media to be on it, 6 a.m.
Yep.
Ready to go. And like, it was my job. Like I would say to the media, like, here's your opportunity. You can either stay here or we can push the plate ahead so that you are here for your broadcast time.
Yeah.
And giving them like the full plate of options, knowing that this was for logistical purposes.
Yeah.
That's the bond that you have. And that exists so much in the campaign and media world that you kind of rely on each other. And the idea of leaking information and stuff is it's never reputation you want, and it doesn't afford you the opportunity to work in these positions if you can't be trusted across the board.
100%. It's funny. I had a conversation with someone shortly after my time on the campaign, and obviously, my time leaving the campaign coincided with someone else leaving at the same time. And so as a result, I got lumped into all of the reporters calling me and like, hey,
Yep.
we want comment. And I was like, listen, I'm like, I will talk to you all day about the podcast and all the
Yep.
cool shit we're doing. But if you want any dirt on the campaign, like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not your guy.
And
as
our
a-
campaign really did not have that is
was-
something we pride ourselves on. The idea of an NDA does not exist in campaigns. Yes,
Yeah.
you sign them. I can tell you that an NDA is, I've never seen it enforced, period. It's not something that can actually happen. It relies
Yeah.
on just integrity.
Yeah.
And I'm contacted still to this day, asking, different questions, new stories, and no, the ability to be trusted in that circle, and knowing that not just me, but like my team, the people that I brought in,
Yeah.
were not people that leaked. Like that's important for your reputation.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And it also is like kind of great for me because I think it was a lot of the political operatives that I was working with, I got a lot of, fair warning. They're like, hey, be careful. These reporters will pretend to be your friend, but then, the first moment they have an opportunity to write something horrible about you, you're toast. And I laugh because I think I got like the exact opposite. I literally had a reporter call me and say, hey, I know you left. I'm writing an article on this other person already. I'm like, okay, you clearly don't give a shit about just, throwing that person under the bus.
Yeah.
But the fact that they called me and asked if I wanted to be written by name or anonymous in the campaign, in her
Yeah.
article. And I was like, I really respect that. And like the fact that I, from a, production person to reporter, was able to build that rapport in a way that I feel like most people in that industry, because it is that very much, who has the info.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I laugh because I'm like, I probably had more dirt and info than anyone else. But
Always. I mean,
it's like-
ask the operations team, like
Yeah.
the biggest drama. They won't disclose it to you in any public area, but they have, without a doubt, the most sensitive information.
Yeah. And it's like, but you understanding, in a world where everyone thinks it's valuable to have that info to sell or whatever,
Yeah.
it's like the people that actually have the important info that can change the world understand that disclosing that to the wrong person
Correct.
is going to be the end of your career.
Exactly. And I say, if yeah, if I leak something, yeah, like it might be an immediate reward. But long term, I mean, I would never hire somebody who has that reputation.
Yeah.
And if you leak, you have that reputation. It's a pretty well known thing in this industry.
Yeah.
So
And word travels
yeah,
so
sometimes you use
fast
it
in
to your
this.
advantage. Sometimes you
Yeah.
hire someone just to leak things.
Yeah.
But no, like understanding that
That's
is important.
didn't I feel like that needs to be a actual job title on campaigns.
There are
Just so
some,
people so you can like make it obvious.
yeah. I mean, it's at the end of the day, like, I mean, I remember sitting at a deli in Des Moines, and it was like where the DeSantis team loved to go and hang
Yeah.
out. And I had a lot of friends over there, and I would go and like we'd eat and we talked to the rabbi over there, and
Yeah.
he'd invite. He goes, "Does this campaign want to come?" Like we would just. It was an open community, and like at the end of the day, like they're your friends.
Yeah.
Like they'll everybody has nightmare stories. If you're on a campaign, you are under extreme pressure. You are not sleeping. You're eating really unhealthy, and you're probably consuming multiple Red Bulls a day.
Yeah.
That is like, so take that for anybody. Like when you're around friends, you're kind of gonna vent and have open conversations.
Yeah.
But the idea of any of us ever communicating to each other with anything that would ever be used to hurt our candidates was just, that is such a foreign concept to do.
Yeah.
And I love that that's a foreign concept in this industry.
Yeah, that's, I mean, shocking considering, the way that politics is painted as this kind of backstabbing industry. And it's like the reality is it's actually a lot more camaraderie based than most people would even realize, because ultimately at the end of the day, and I think like, not to say this in a calloused way,
Yeah.
but it's like at the end of the day, your goal is there to make the person win.
Yep.
But ultimately for a lot of people in that industry, win or lose, you're all just having fun at the end of the day.
Correct.
And like you really, you're not to say you're not putting the effort and the energy into it, but like you're going to go on to the next campaign and the next one after that. And it's, I talk with people and I didn't understand this perspective in the moment because I was like, no, but we have to focus on getting him to win. And they're like, yeah, but like this is one guy. I had this other guy that was like kind of a dick, and this other guy was like really great, and like all these other things. But at the end of the day, it's just one person in your list of however many people you've tried to get elected.
Yeah. And I'll say like, what's interesting about campaigns in general is when you have like an in-house team, like your actual core campaign staff, those are the people that I would put in the category of they're the ride or die to get the campaign life, to keep it operating, to keep it moving. Where you start to see more of the corruption on the side of campaigns really always falls on the outside consultant side, because those are the folks that have 20 plus candidates, and they don't have that. They don't have the bandwidth to really invest any amount of time or energy into one candidate, and because of that, the loyalty isn't there. It is funny, like when we talk about the corruption in politics, you don't really ever see it on that campaign level as much. It's the super PACs, it's the outside money and the outside influence. That's where corruption happens. But on the operational side, I mean, it's a pretty tight knit group.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting perspective, because I was even thinking about that, when I was hearing all these other people working with, multiple different candidates, and I'm sitting over here like, wait a second, I get like maybe 6 hours of sleep a night in my own bed sometimes. How the fuck do you have the ability to do multiple?
They say the joke is the hardest working people on a campaign are the ones that are always making the least amount of money. And ideally, if you want to grow up into the campaign and become a quote unquote professional campaigner, the idea would be to go into that consulting space where you are not doing as much work. You are overseeing it, you're giving your advice, but you're not for the most part fielding like the day of emergencies. You're not staffing it, you're not on the ground. And that's okay. You need to have both sides of this. You need to have those expert consultants. But yeah, you're going to be hard pressed to find quality campaign staffers. And when you do find quality campaign staffers that choose to go all in on a campaign, it's something special, and it gives you a different type of trust And as somebody who hires a lot of folks and brings people in, there is use for all of them. I have so many friends that started off as consultants that we brought
Yeah.
in. But generally speaking, like, it means that you want to like dedicate yourself to this specific mission, and it garners more trust
Yeah.
within the campaign staff.
Definitely. That's that's pretty incredible. Um, awesome. Well, I think I've exhausted my entire, ethos on like the campaign life. But
Yeah,
once again,
it's a
thank
fun
you.
experience.
Yeah, it's truly a once in a lifetime thing. Um,
It is, and what's interesting is the American electorate. And someone told me this a long time ago. Like, never underestimate how short of memory the American electorate has.
hmm,
And I would hear that, and I worked for candidates that would have a horrible reputation on X, Y, and Z issue. That cycle would be all that they were pressed on, and it is amazing that you can reinvent. You can really reinvent, and that's like the power of media. That's the power of having like good storytelling within a
yeah,
campaign. No candidate really is going to be. Every candidate has the ability to reshape, redevelop, re-image how they want to be perceived, and
yeah,
as issues change, as I think back to Obama 2008. I don't think
yeah.
gay marriage was on a platform at that point, and the
Oh,
idea that
yeah.
he ran against gay marriage, now looking at 2025, you're like, that seems so foreign to
That's
like
insane.
be
Yeah,
on the blue side and anti-gay marriage. But like, this is why, like, that American electorate, it is a short memory.
yeah,
So for people like you who build the narratives for these candidates, it gives you nonstop work.
yeah. It never stops because it's like, especially if you're constantly trying to change the narrative on what someone's saying, or, from my perspective on it, like my goal with the stories that I'm telling is like trying to find what those like real human stories are. Because frankly, a conversation that I had with someone on our campaign a couple years ago, just kind of like in the back of an Uber, just being like, hey, here's my vision. These are the stories we tell. We have the infrastructure inside the campaign to keep, everything going.
Yeah.
If we focus on telling these stories through all of your really cool AI ad targeting
Yeah.
stuff, those stories go to every single person. We connect the banker on Wall Street, the farmer in Iowa, and everyone in between to supporting this campaign. I think we've won the election. I've never seen someone so excited in my entire life and then proceed to not do a single thing about it.
Yeah. It's
So, there I think the idea is there. And I think like from my perspective, seeing it is like, and especially understanding kind of that in-person side of it. And, I think so many people are now waking up to the reality that if you go online, chances are you're going to be very upset because you're going to find 100 ways to be upset.
yeah,
But if
absolutely.
you go out into the real world and you just start talking with people and you like, I mean, most of these political conversations don't have to come up in day to day. And I have a lot of friends that I genuinely disagree with, but I'm still really good friends with
Of
them
course.
because we don't talk about this stuff all the time. And
Yeah.
occasionally we get into something, but
But generally
we can still
speaking,
respect each other.
no, and that's it's funny because as I will be in a state, living in Iowa, for example, or living down in Florida, I'll hear from my family, and like, I don't know how you're doing it. I don't know how, like, it's so
Yeah.
toxic, and I go, not if you're on the ground here. Like, if you're
Yeah.
on the ground here, you're not getting that toxicity at all. You're seeing like hardworking people who are passionate about the country
Yeah.
and passionate about their issues, and all you have to do is talk to people, and you'll find that there is so much more agreeable than not, across the board. No matter the issue, you can agree, and it's a good starting point.
100%. And like I mean the bigger thing for me is like starting to like see and understand the cavity of professionals in industry that are subject matter experts and the people that are writing policy to govern those people.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not going to wade into this because I don't need the fire on it right now. But let's just say I'm working on the outline for a documentary right now
Yeah.
that's going to hit on a relatively sensitive subject in terms of environment, policy, and everything in between.
Yeah.
And in my research on this whole thing, it kind of opened my eyes to the reality of if the senator and the policymakers, literally, I had an idea for a game show concept where you get these people that are writing the policy, and they have to go out and do the jobs of the people that they're regulating. And the people that are doing those jobs will be standing there with a clipboard with all the regulations. And every time they do something that makes perfect sense but is regulated to not be done, that person is like, no, you can't do that. And then the person will realize the absurdity of their regulation, or whatever that thing
absolutely. is. It's crazy. The more you dive in, you see how not practical solutions are. And they're things that would be practical had you sat down and talked to the industry.
It turns out that if you go and you talk with the people that actually do the job day to day, you'll get the reality of the situation on the ground. And unfortunately, I will take my part in responsibility that the people in the media and people that create and tell these very intentionally crafted stories will create whatever that chaos is.
Correct.
And unfortunately, the strongest emotion that you can get out of someone is anger. And so everything that is created is focusing on that anger and frustration. If happiness and joy was the way that we got people to move to action, the entire landscape of social media and the way we talk about this stuff would be completely different.
Yeah, it is funny. I've had the opportunity to work for some folks that were very purple and that had come together on different issues. And I remember Speaker Boehner had said this to my member. I don't remember what the vote issue was, but it was something that the Republicans at this point they were going to win the vote. They had the majority. But I think it involved an environmental issue. Yeah. And my representative he represented Key West. And you're going to be hard pressed to find folks that are down in Key West that don't care about water, and water quality and pollution. Of course they do. And I remember there was a vote, and this is where you could go and vote in favor of your party. In a situation like today where the Republicans have almost no majority at all, you need everybody to vote that way. Yeah. But in this case, I remember Speaker Boehner saying, vote with your district, vote for your people. That's what your job is. That's why you're here. Yeah. And I remember thinking that is such a simple concept, and it seems so obvious, and yet it's not instilled in everyday politics. And when you find members of Congress, governors, senators, anyone that is willing to work across the aisle or do that unpopular vote, there's a lot of courage involved in that. And I wish people understood that this is compromise and people wanting to work together. But unfortunately, we live in a world where it is easier to polarize people.
Yeah.
And it's easier to get elected when you're more polarizing.
Of course. Yeah. And being able to work and find those compromises, I think is crucially important. I think another thing, and this is just I'm getting a crash course on how all this stuff works, but being able to simplify whatever that bill or policy is that we're trying to pass. Because the reality is if you're trying to, for example, pollution, I think I can safely say, and especially being in Columbus near where, the East Palestine whole situation happened, pollution in our waterways is something I think everyone can unanimously agree is something we should be taking care of.
Yeah.
But when you put in whatever that bill is, or that funding, or that investigation, whatever it is, with some other thing that you're trying to get through, then basically what you're saying is, actually my bigger priority is to get this other thing through that's probably going to be a little bit harder to pass, but we need to get it done, versus something that everyone can unanimously agree on needs to be done. Yeah,
and that is why we seem to be in a position that every year we are about to have a government shutdown, and it's always on one specific issue that both sides are sticking their heels on, and that unfortunately is causing the entire federal government to risk not operating at all, because of how it's combined. And there's a lot of strategy with it. And I will say, on the Hill side, you have your political folks. A Hill is made up of your representative, and then your chief of staff is usually political. But for the most part, like those legislative aides, and they also work within each other and work within offices, and there's so much unity that exists in that world too, where it is so much less polarizing. You can really affect change being on committees and doing things. Unfortunately, just Congress is it's a hard place to be in. I I don't believe like you'll ever see a Speaker of the House become president for this reason. It's you are involved on too much. You have too many views on specific issues that you're going to piss people off. It's like
Yeah.
you're bound to. That's why we saw with Newt Gingrich, we saw with Paul Ryan. It's just you're not going to be able to get that support because you have to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
And I'll say like with Marco Rubio, like when he joined Senate, like back in 2010, he he was Hispanic. He wanted to come in as like the unifier, helping to solve the big immigration issue. And I don't know if your listeners remember the Gang of Eight and this whole committee that was built in the Senate around like let's solve a bipartisan group to solve the immigration issue. And they came in, they put an issue out. It failed in Senate. But years later, working on that presidential, the number of times I would have a person come to me and say, you're like, we can't vote for him because of amnesty. And I just remember being like, wow, like what a polarizing issue. Like, but
Yeah.
this is where it's like it's much better to be a governor or a businessman running for higher office than a senator or a congressman, because your record is it'll be used against you at all times. And as I said, like the situation changes. Voting against gay marriage in 2008, saying that that's your record nowadays would not be acceptable for a Democratic candidate, period.
Oh, 100%.
But in those days, that was where it was. So,
Yeah.
Using records, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think it's like, everyone talks about like the Overton window of like what's acceptable, and like over time that's like constantly shifting. And I think culturally we see that happen where, things are going to come into, importance. And I honestly like the way I think of it is like, if the problem's not directly in front of you, it's really hard to quantify that.
Yeah.
And so I think, there's a lot of things that are constantly going on that it's hard to have a really like hard understanding of all the details going into it.
And it's intended to be that way.
And it's intended to be that way, because if you could know all the things, I think one of my best interviews I did with one of my friends, he's a DP and worked in news for a while. And I remember him telling me he went down to the southern border in, I think it was like 2017 or 2018. And he's a, similar to me, very just like objective storyteller. He's like, I just want to like tell the whole story. Yeah. You only ever hear bits and pieces. What is the story?
Yeah.
And he was, hired by a right-wing publication at the time to go tell the story. Yeah. And as he's down at the border, he's like, I looked over to my left and I saw the guy from Vice. I looked over all the way to the right, saw the guy from Breitbart. And then I look at the entire scenario and he's like, I know the story that they're going to be telling, and I know the story that they're going to be telling. And unfortunately, that's the 1% on the extreme end of this entire thing going on. He's like, yes, there's a lot of people coming over, but he's like, there's a lot of people coming just to like try and have a chance at living a better life. And if they could do everything right, they would do everything they could.
Yeah.
But it was this like just fog of war chaos that created this whole situation. And now it's like, a whole thing.
Yeah. And I've had the opportunity to go down to the border for multiple different campaigns, and on the official side, it was Donna McAllen during a government shutdown back in 2018. And that was, I think, the government shutdown on the border wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the reporting. You look at one reporting and you're going to see the wall in the background, and you're going to praise how much the wall has grown on a conservative side, and on the left side you see an open border and how there's all this money being invested and nothing is changing. Yeah. And I'll tell you where I learned all the information from was talking to the actual Border Patrol folks and talking to the local staff that are living in those communities. They're the ones that have like the absolute best perspective of the situation going on. And the media, at the end of the day, they have their own objective. Porn trauma sells a lot better than anything else. So it's no surprise to me that you're not going to cover the like family separation policies
Yeah.
or where children are kept when it's one administration versus another,
Yeah.
and how with another administration it becomes like a defining part. That's the sad part about politics. It's
Yeah.
like, by ignoring, this is a shared national security issue that we can all agree with, that something needs to be done to curb the immigration and to make, I don't know whether it's making path to citizenship easier, but like we all share at least a unified agreement that the current situation is broken.
Yeah.
Like this needs to be fixed, and you see it across the board on by both candidates. The media reflecting the issue would be incredibly beneficial across both administrations, for people to see that like you can have whoever you want in office and their problem still exists. Like you can't
Yeah.
pretend it doesn't, and vice versa. So um
Yeah, I think there's a huge part to it in that like we have to understand the humanity of it,
yeah,
but I think that like there to a certain point, like a common theme in my life and a lot of the conversations that I've had earlier this week, talking about the like hard work, determination, and all the things to like get you to a place in life, and I think that there's a lot of people that are working and trying to do that in coming to this country. And I think that in some cases, I see a lot of people focusing way too much on the human side of things. And it's hard because that's my heart
of
bleeds for
course.
that. But I also like, there's a part of me that understands that, like, I was just scrolling through social media the other day and saw, a whole article on people getting kicked out of Mexico for overstaying their visa. I've spent, as similar to you, I've spent a lot of time traveling around the world.
Yeah,
On a missions trip a number of years ago, we didn't find out until afterwards we were getting literally stalked by the Vietnamese government. It's like, if you've never had a foreign government watching every single move you make, you don't understand like the reality of like the situation.
it's
And
true.
the thought that came very clearly to me the other day was realizing like, I have that context, you have that context
Yeah,
to go into this. And I think one of the big things, and I know regardless of who you are, everyone talks about America is supposed to be better.
yeah,
And so I think I don't have a solution to this problem exactly, but I think one of the things that I see a lot of people, both critics of how immigration is being handled and, people that support it, is America should be the place that you can have that opportunity to do the right thing.
yeah.
So
No, and I share it also, and it's funny how my views on immigration over the years have changed, and I think it's trips to McAllen and to Yuma that have opened my perspective on different issues. I what I encourage everyone is to talk to people, to go and actually have conversations with folks that this is impacting. Um, if you are relying on the news to get like your perspective on what's happening, it's just not going to be correct, and that's on both sides of the aisle. It's both sides are gonna um, they're selling their story,
yeah.
and unfortunately, camaraderie and common sense don't sell as well.
Yeah, and I can also kind of give the like little bit of inside baseball. One of the criticisms that my friend had when he was covering this story back in 2018 was the golden handcuffs that he was tied to, in that there's audience capture.
Yep.
And so he had he's like, this is the full story I want to tell. And he's like, if we tell this, we're going to lose 80% of our subscribers.
Yeah.
And he's like, what that means is we tell that story, our conscience is clean, and now all of a sudden I don't have a job.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's the reality of this entire news landscape that I think, the rise of social media is supposed to clear that out. But I think what people don't realize is, also having a little bit of a window into that side of things, the amount of money you can make on these platforms is otherworldly.
correct.
And people have, they might not be tied into, brought to you by Pfizer, but they are tied into the ad
They all
dollars
have
that
an
are coming from the
agenda.
platform. They
Correct.
have the agenda, they have the audience that is giving them the views that is ultimately paying their bills.
Yeah, and we'll say, I mean, social media was built around the concept of authenticity, and
Yeah.
that's what sells. And as we're seeing, you're monetizing authenticity now. So like, it's in their best interest to be pushing this agenda and making it seem as if it is like as genuine as real as possible. And that's again, it's you just have to look at all perspectives of it, and that's something where if you want to learn and hear different perspectives, like social media is an incredible platform to see things that you would never normally get to see. You wouldn't get to see what it looks like to walk around like the Rio Grande and like talking to different border patrol folks. But also there's nothing you should be watching at this point, especially if it's viral, that you don't look at with a grain of salt. I think it's just kind of common sense. And I think we are all obsessed with the buzzwords, and the reason we're obsessed with them is because the media continue to use them. It's because that's what sells.
Yeah. Two of my favorite books that I read, ironically, towards the end of 2022, right before I hopped on this campaign, was Manufacturing Consent and Propaganda by Edward Bernays.
I remember you talking about that.
It is fascinating there's a principle from Manufacturing Consent that just blew my mind, and I got to see it in real time play out over the past couple of years, in that if you look at the words used in headlines, that tells you who's the worthy victim and who,
always
is the unworthy that
it
can
paints
just,
it from the top. And I think the best part of getting to work with these candidates and be so close with them is really understanding what is genuine and what isn't.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, when you work with candidates that are really genuine or passionate on those issues, it just makes, even if it's an issue you don't even agree on, just it being like a real genuine issue makes it so much easier to want to help promote.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, you can't hide that level of authenticity. And I think, people are always drawn to someone's passion for whatever it is,
that is what, at the end of the day, that sells more than anything. And that's the most successful candidates are the ones that are actually genuine about their mission. And that's why we'll see some really, really boring congressmen and senators that are sitting there that continue to get reelected. And you think, how can they continue to win elections time and time again? They're so boring. Like, I wouldn't want to listen to them on a podcast. I wouldn't want to watch them on an interview. But it's because they know what they're talking about, and they're genuine, and they care about really making a change. And people feel that and see that.
Yeah, that conviction, you can't fake it, no matter how much you try.
No, and I think you know better than anyone how you can try. I mean, and you can fool people, and eventually, if it's not genuine, cracks will show.
Yeah, and I think one of the best things that's come out of ChatGPT in this AI revolution is it's really easy to take a transcript and figure out where it originates.
Right?
It's mind blowing.
I know. I know it is. It's just. I mean, the idea of ChatGPT being a thing that's being used for speech writing and for op-eds and articles and stuff, like, it just so much has changed. Just
yeah, it's wild.
Yeah. I'm interested to see like where we'll go from here. I do think, again, as we phase out, as less people are watching cable news, as less people are watching sports, we're gonna see a rise in like this new cross digital platform. So no, it's exciting, and I think the folks that get on top of it and are in the front end of it are the ones that are going to end up impacting the most change.
That's amazing.
Yeah, got to have a candidate willing to do it. But again, it has to be authentic. If it's something that doesn't match their personality, there's no point in doing it.
Yeah,
you can't sell something that isn't there.
You can't authentically read off a teleprompter.
No, and you know that well.
Yeah, I laugh. I have never operated a teleprompter in my life, except for the one time I had to.
Where was that?
On our campaign. It was an interesting moment, to say the least. I thought I had everything figured out, and then very quickly learned I did not. But it solved the need that it did in the moment.
It's funny, like speaking of like teleprompters, I worked closely with with Trump's teleprompter, his scroller. And the way it works in the White House is the White House Communication Agency is WACA. They're the ones that essentially build the infrastructure for all technical
Yeah.
components on the campaign or on the trail. And like the Waka folks, they're all military, and they're active. Like this is their mission. They've been assigned to the White House, which is one of the highest honors.
Yeah.
They're not political. They serve both administrations. That's that is their role. But like it is a job to be a scroller and to work a teleprompter, and that's like a very designed position. And when Trump came into office, it was. His style is different. He goes off script. He moves differently. A traditional scroller is not gonna. It's not gonna work.
Yeah.
And those are the fun. Those are like the fun, exciting stories and experiences that you work with. That no, like you needed to have somebody who really understood his personality and who could scroll with him and know that he could go at a tangent here and still scroll up here like 3 minutes later and know where to pick back up and guide it. And
That's insane.
those are the cool things that the authentic, like an actual authentic person really. And I don't think Trump I think if anything you're going to hear there's a lot of authenticity, whether it's well received or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. There is a lot of authenticity because he isn't going to be reading off of that script.
Yeah.
You're going to bring in outside people.
You gotta,
and it makes it way more fun.
yeah, you got to be ready for any sort of tangent because that would be chaos. Yeah,
You learn a lot.
I had an opportunity last year. The campaign I was working on, we ultimately, part of our time and resources ended up going into covering his rallies. And so at the 11th hour, they were like, "Hey, we need you to go up to Wisconsin and cover this rally." And I was like, "Okay, great." So I got press credentials, I got staff credentials. It was the weirdest thing ever because literally I get to the event and I'm treated just like all the other press and like, okay, shuttled into this area.
Yep, here's your riser.
Treated like a peon. And then literally the, person handling everything comes over and is like, "Oh, here, put that in your backpack. Here's this. Now you can go anywhere." And I was like, whoa, this is kind of crazy.
Right.
But seeing that experience, and our friend John Hiller was doing all of the advance for everything, and I remember standing up on the secondary riser, and he comes over and he's just kind of like looking everywhere. I was like, "What you working on, John?" And he's like, "Well, we're gonna pull his plane in right here and see where the walkway is. We're gonna line it up just like this." And I was like, "Of course you are. That's exactly what I love to see." Fast forward, literally, 4 hours later, in the middle of the rally, we're doing our rounds, and I'm with the head of press, and we walk up onto the second riser, and she's like, "That plane lined up perfectly." And I was like, "It was on purpose."
Well, I mean, honestly, one of my favorite things to do is watch, especially at the beginning of an event. Like I'll take pictures, but if I bring in somebody who is a quality advanced staffer, and as I said, it's a pretty small world, I love watching what they can produce. I love watching and knowing that my mind couldn't conceptualize what they're thinking. That's what makes it so special.
Yeah.
And that's what makes each campaign event different. And White House is different in that you have to follow some basic structural rules on things. But on a campaign, the more creative, the more fun, the more interactive. It's just a new experience. And I think we just we started approaching some new topics. I think on the Vivek campaign, he was doing the like an old like 1776 theme during a part, and I was on the phone, Facebook messaging, like trying to find anyone who could be a revolutionary reenactor to come in, and we built that into like how we did our events, and we built it into the Iowa State Fair. And it's those are cool things that you need to have a candidate who's willing to like kind of think outside of the box,
come up with those ideas.
Exactly. It makes it more fun. And then having somebody to execute it who has never done something like this before, but knows that like you need to get these guys in a shot. You need to like, because that builds your image. That's what the media is going to see. But no, it really is an honor to watch. And I've seen, I used to say, to Ben and Katie, like, I mean, yes, Ben, you were planning the Putin summit and building some of the backdrops and all these, and like incredible talent that exists in this world, and so much institutional knowledge. It's just such a joy to watch it all come together.
Yeah, that's truly incredible. And it's like, I think for me, it's like, it's almost the like perfect intersection of logistics and creative, because the reality is like, if you're, all the way over on the other side of the world, you have zero of the connections you think you're going to have,
Yeah.
and a very good chance of everything to go exactly how you don't need it to go. And so in that moment, you have to figure out, okay, before we get there, I need to make sure I've got, a translator, someone that can do, all these different
Oh, yeah.
things. But by the time you guys walk into the room and they have that meeting,
They're not supposed to
everything
know anything. It looks perfect.
You'll never see Ben in a photo.
No.
But
no, and in
his
fact,
work
you
is
should never
there.
see any of them in a photo. It's
Yeah.
if you're doing your job, you're not seen. You really are. You're building, and then you're going on to the next one.
Yeah.
That's like some of the best advanced staffers. And again, that is a position that doesn't exist in the normal world. It's not something that corporate America could absolutely benefit from.
Yeah.
Because there's so much money that goes into investing in events and especially high production value, and yet you don't have a sign on your podium, or you don't have the mics working, where it's
That's actually a big thing. So one of the guys that I've been privileged to work with quite a bit, he does a lot of work in the virtual event space, does a lot of work for IMAX and some of these bigger companies. And one of the big things that he talks about all the time is, if you're preparing for an event, think like the Super Bowl's coming up.
Yeah.
You're going to have, 500,000 people in the stadium and another, 100 and something million people watching live. How many run-throughs have they done on the Super Bowl halftime show by the time they get there? How many times have they run through all of the other crazy nonsense? I can't talk about a Zoom call that I may or may not have gotten to see that watches kind of how the sausage is made on that. The amount of prep that goes into these events is unreal.
I know, and people have no idea.
And you'll never know.
Yeah.
But you will know if things go sideways.
Correct.
I think like, the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight, like the infrastructure falls apart, and the only thing you see online is everyone tweeting about the fact that their Netflix isn't loading.
Correct.
But, that for me is like, I see the like overlap of like the production world and like the event space. And it's like, once you start treating these things with more, respect, the way I see it is like, now with the advent of social media, and especially for the clientele that we tend to work with, you eventually get to a place where you're doing these, crazy numbers on a live stream, but they're treating it as if, oh, we'll just run in and we'll go live. And it's like, okay, great. But like, how many people are we expecting this to go out to? Because we were able to circumvent a lot of small events on the campaign trail where, we go into a room and, we should have canceled this event because there's only 5 people that showed up. But you know what? We're going to go and we're going to live stream it. And that message is still going to go out to 100,000
Exactly.
people.
It's
like,
the reach.
That's where we get it.
And people who understand that are the ones that are going to benefit the most. But the idea of having a cameraman
100%.
Following on a campaign trail is just not standard practice in a campaign.
For me, that makes no sense. The fact that was the revolutionary thing we did blows my mind.
No, and it's like normally it would be assigned to like a bus tour or something, a larger event. You'd bring in like a crew to come in and do it for a day or two. But no, like and this is where we talk about that in-house benefit. When you have somebody like you that's in-house that like you can incorporate into all of your plans. It was not just like the events, but it was also every single media hit that we had to do. It was the building of the backdrops. It was the audio of using an AirPod, like wireless versus plugged in. Like those attention to detail are the reason people would be logging in. And the same vice, if it was shitty quality, you saw viewership go down across the board. And it's no coincidence that's people at the end of the day still want to be authentic, but quality authenticity.
Yeah.
And audio matters.
Yeah. I mean, I will preach
we
that
talked a
until
lot.
the
I know
end
you're
of
the
time.
audio guy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing.
It is. And I'll say like, I've kind of transitioned out of the world of politics into the world of esports for the same concept of I'm obsessed with I'm obsessed with the media production and how people consume and get their information.
Yeah,
And yeah, this past August, I was watching the inaugural World Cup in Saudi Arabia, and you're watching Kid Cudi performing and putting an album out, and you're understanding that this is now like a multifaceted media platform. And when you have a half a billion viewers, you understand,
that's a lot of
have a half
people.
a billion viewers, and I've never even heard of what this is.
Yeah,
Like the proof is in the numbers and the trends, and that's where it's going. And I think, again, as our world continues to transition, as we have younger voters that are coming up, I think the world is the world. It's your oyster on what you want to be able to accomplish, but it
yeah,
will not be the traditional. But quality still will be needed.
100%. What is one of the most exciting things that you're seeing in the esports world?
So because esports has become a an Olympic sport now, because it's received such international attention. It's been so fun watching esports compared to traditional sports. In traditional sports, we have you start with your little league
Mhm.
and your t-ball. You work your way up. You go to you play in a club sport in high school. You go to college. You become a spectator. You might become a sports bettor who bets on the occasional baseball game.
Yeah,
But that's like the trajectory, and that's how that industry has been created and sustained. On the flip side, like the esports has been like a very top down approach where it's big on the international. You're seeing like millions and millions of prize pool and half a billion viewers coming in for the World Cup, and yet like on this level in the United States, like it doesn't have a great platform. It doesn't have a development to actually pipeline it. So it's been so fun to get into a space that is still so new to so many people. I love spending my days explaining to people a concept of an incredibly powerful media platform that so many kids are on, and yet they've never heard of it.
that's
It
crazy.
it blows my mind, and it just tells me how much more there is to learn.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about like esports prior to this, and one of the things that was really fascinating to me, you were kind of like laying out, and especially in the company that you work for, is like the ability to use esports in an education space because as a lot of these like tech jobs are maybe infrastructurally hard to implement in schools, it's super easy to spin up a esports program and being able to using the games that you're producing and providing to these kids be able to train a lot of high skills. I mean,
Absolutely.
even the viral moment from Elon's most recent episode with Joe Rogan, like
Yep.
talking about how top
Every surgeon.
surgeons
Yep.
are played video games and
Then they should
that
be
fine
required
motor
for
dexterity.
dexterity.
Yeah,
It really is like a game changer with it. Yeah, I really have found such like a fascination in learning it, and also this is where it goes back to the storytelling and the
yeah,
narratives of things. Like right now, the older generations, especially like the baby boomer end of it, the idea of a video game really much it alludes to a screen addiction or school shooters,
yeah.
and like that is the
School.
concept when 95% of kids under 18 are playing it. It's but it still has the stigma where in some of these Asian countries in Europe it doesn't have that stigma. It's like very much a community. It's where kids go after school and they go in game and build their friends. Their in-person friendships are built on that.
Yeah,
So like this is that power of the reality exists that surgeons are learning how to do surgery using robotics from a console, just like a PlayStation console. Pilots are learning how to fly on simulators. The army is learning how to fly drones on a
that's amazing.
on a simulator. And yet that concept is still not mainstream enough for people to understand like that it can be used for your actual development. And I find a lot of excitement seeing a space that has the potential to really help solve some of our big workforce problems and recruitment issues, by simply common sense using the tools that are out there, and the science and the developments to really help inform and engage like the new generation.
Yeah, I think to kind of tie it into like my industry specifically, I was just talking about this with someone recently, is the idea of fiction and Hollywood and fictional storytelling is a medium that we use to articulate different characteristics that we want kids to understand, because they can escape into that fantasy world and pretend to be that knight in shining armor slaying the demons, and that's how they're going to learn courage. And similarly, when you look at like video games, I think about it as a kid. I remember my mom always being like, oh, you know, don't want you to rot your brain out, don't play video games, don't whatever. And while I have my moments, I'm like, thank you mom for not having me spend all that time indoors playing video games. But what I'm now realizing is the games that I remember being drawn to as a kid, they tended to have a lot of like problem solving skills, and there's all these different things that you can learn in these moments. And I remember briefly going into high school, I went to a relatively forward-thinking high school that unfortunately got lost to the age of technology. You know, was trying to do everything online. But I remember those extremely cringy education-based video games. And now it's like, okay, why don't we just make a great video game? But because we have so many smart people working on developing these things with the stories that are going into it, you can integrate all of these learning things that people just don't even think twice about. You don't have to put math in the video game to get people to understand how to do math.
Correct. And that's the cool thing. It is no longer that educational Bill Nye, like this is where you're going to learn your information from. It really is you can play Minecraft and all of a sudden you can go into that world with your teacher, with your instructors, and follow along and learn it. It really does just open the door for just a new world of opportunities. No, it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I absolutely love this, and this conversation has been amazing. I think we've hit on so many different subjects.
Yeah, I think we've talked campaigns, White House,
everything.
Esports.
Yeah, it's quite the gamut, but I really appreciate the time for it. And, you know, hopefully we'll be able to do this again sometime soon.
And I will say, like, your people like you are why we do this campaign, why you do campaigns. It's that at the end of the day, a campaign is just a year. It's 2 years. It's a cycle. The friendships you build from it, the people that the network that I can go to you at any point. And, you know, we were just talking about making a short esports video to help summarize this long hour concept into a small condensed thing. And having people like you on that Rolodex are exactly why I love doing this.
Yeah, it's something I really enjoyed from it. And I know that some of the friendships I made through this are probably going to be people I'll know hopefully for the next 60 to 80 years.
It's a real trauma bonding experience.
It's a great way to put it. Awesome.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Rebecca. Bye, everybody.
Bye.